Like the very early days, like who makes the pricing decisions?
It kind of starts and goes by.
AI features are going to impact overall pricing of a product.
But what is our AI pricing strategy? How should we evolve monetization? Deploying, training, fine-tuning AI models at scale, it's actually expensive. So can you imagine all these finance teams that are trying to structure their revenue and cost plans, and one day to the next, capabilities can 10x improve and price can x drop?
How do you go about bundling while maintaining a certain price integrity and not diminish the value perception?
Teams sometimes make the mistake of presenting bundling options purely from a discount perspective. That's also the most important question. Are you actually aligning and selecting the right value metric to match this behavior that you want to incentivize in your customers? At the end of the day, pricing is just friction. And the question is, how much friction do you want to project onto your users?
Hey everyone, this is Carlos. I'm here with the CEO at Orb, Álvaro Morales. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you and talk about a very hot topic in product, pricing. I know you've been dealing with this for quite some time. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit more about you and your company?
Yes, absolutely. So like I said, I'm the co-founder and CEO at Orb. Orb is the flexible billing engine for modern pricing models and software. What that means is that day in, day out, we're helping customers navigate some of the hardest transitions in their business, such as going from a single product to a multi-product strategy, evolving from a seat-based pricing model to a usage-based pricing model, or thinking about what is the best way to expand revenue through their customer. The common thread between all those things is pricing, which is a very nuanced and hard topic. But we're very excited to be powering billing for some of the most cutting edge companies such as Vercel, Replit, or Perplexity, some innovators in the AI space that are really pushing the bounds when it comes to pricing.
And Alvaro, who are some of your investors?
We have we're a VC funded company. We have folks such as Greylock and Menlo Ventures on the journey with us and helping us build the company.
Awesome. So pricing. I see that before you started your company, you worked as a software engineer at Asana for around 5 years. So can imagine that you felt some of that pain before you decided to solve it.
Yes, I think the experience that I had at Asana was very inspirational and fundamental to this journey of building Orb. But I think one thing to share with your audience is prior to this, I knew nothing about pricing. In fact, when I got asked to kind of help or be a part of some teams driving some pricing changes at Asana, I honestly thought I was going to walk in and see a bunch of financial models and Excel spreadsheets and get to write 3 lines of code and move on with my life. And instead, I discovered that this discipline is as incredibly like product centric and customer centric as it gets. It's really about teams understanding what value they're generating for their customers and how those customers perceive that value and making like a nuanced set of trade-offs to achieve the best strategy. So that's where my engineering brain, I think, really globbed onto this world and got excited about the possibility that pricing as a strategic lever for growth at a company really provides. Unfortunately, I got to see how simple pricing changes, such as changing a per seat price point from $9 to $10 or shifting the number of tiers, was very, very hard. Specifically, some of these changes took the company I was at before over 6 months to roll out. And counterintuitively, it was also one of the most successful initiatives and on the revenue side that the company attempted. So I'm looking at that situation both in terms of, wow, that was immensely painful for the engineering, product, finance teams involved, and it was incredibly valuable for the business and our customers. So the gap here was, how come it's 2024 and we still have revenue and billing systems that get in the way and slow down our product launches? How can there be a better way? And that's why we've been building Orb for the past 3.5 years.
Because Asana, for people who don't know, it's a public company, huge project management tool used by many product teams as well as other types of teams. And they're one of the pioneers in product-led growth, right? They have a free tier that was used by so many people. They had different pricing tiers. Some of them were like, as you mentioned, like 9, 10, $15 a month. And they also have like their own custom enterprise pricing. So like who makes, or I can imagine those companies evolve, but like the very early days, like who makes that pricing decisions?
I've seen that grow and evolve at Asana as well as across a number of our customers today, where early on, so much of pricing is either said by founders or initial teams, or somebody makes kind of a best guess out there, and then industries like prop up around that. In fact, I think there is a kind of infamous story about how the original pricing for Dropbox got kind of said and arrived on, and all of a sudden we have over 15 years of that industry being anchored around that price point. So I think at the beginning, it kind of starts and goes by well-built customer intuition with an educated guess. The thing that's really interesting, though, is as companies evolve, this becomes a lot more sophisticated and cross-functional. So, for instance, some larger scale organizations have pricing teams whose entire mandate is to think about pricing as a strategic problem with a set of opportunities to go drive. There are companies that follow the best practice of setting up a pricing committee. That is a forum where you get representation not just from product, but also from product marketing, from sales, from finance, and you approach this question of how should we design and iterate on our pricing strategy from the multiple perspectives. Because one thing that I really like to say is the problem of pricing is really a problem of revenue, and it's incredibly cross-functional. It's gonna be hard to find a problem more cross-functional than the problem of revenue. So solving it really requires that multiple perspective.
And everybody has an opinion, including investors, right? Like you just say, well, we need to increase revenue. Well, let's increase pricing. But there are clearly implications for that. No customer likes to have their pricing increased. So, based on your own experience, what is kind of the evolution? Let's say at the very beginning, someone on the founding team makes a judgment call based on their own experience, competitors, and whatnot. Ultimate other end of the spectrum is a full-on pricing team. But what happens in between?
I think the first evolution really starts around companies and teams deciding to try a more experimental lens on their pricing. What do I mean by that? Like actually think about, hey, we're about to launch this new feature. What if we monetized it a different way? Now, by and large, especially in the early days, that kind of happens by accident or as a byproduct. It's not uncommon to see a lot of product teams think about pricing as kind of one of the very last steps in the checklist to get a feature launched, as opposed to one of the very first steps of it. So honestly, organizations sometimes go through some stumble points or some growing pains around, oh, wow, we kind of thought about pricing as an afterthought a little bit, or we didn't realize that this new thing we were doing should and could impact pricing. So after like making some of those mistakes or learning some of those lessons along the way, I think it's really interesting to see how some of these processes get built around thinking of pricing as a product. And in fact, maybe even going as far as designing pricing strategies ahead or alongside the specification of what is the new product that we get to build. So you kind of see this shift from, oh, we really weren't thinking a lot about it, to maybe it's like one of the top items in our product launch or product marketing launch brief and template. And then following that, that's when you start getting the perspective of, well, maybe the revenue organization's goals are going against some of the pricing decisions that we are seeing on the product side. So that's where like that cross-functional committee that I was describing, it often gets formed as a way to really incorporate and bring together those perspectives.
So, in software as a service, what are the most common pricing models that you've seen?
Absolutely. So the subscription seat pricing model is still kind of very prevalent and one of the most popular ones. That is where you're paying for access to a platform and you're provisioning somebody a seat. There are some variations within that. So, for example, Figma, a product that we're all pretty familiar with, has this distinction between an editor seat, I have permissions to make changes, versus a viewer seat. But by and large, the pricing model is, do I have access and a login to this tool? There's still like a bunch of many examples of more license-based software. This shows up in either on-premise or open source communities where I'm paying for a fixed amount for a given period of time. And then the big trend that we're seeing throughout the industry and that Orb's mission really uniquely supports is around a usage-based or consumption-based pricing model where we're not just paying for that, gym subscription we don't go to. It's actually we are paying for the usage of the product. I'm only paying for what I'm consuming, and we see this sort of originate from the electricity utilities that we pay every month to the AWS like pricing models, and start to sort of show up in really interesting ways across a number of software, including AI based software.
Usage-based pricing. Like I can see how this is potentially better for a user because it aligns incentives with the business. What would you say are the downsides for the business if they decide to implement that type of model?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for buyers, buyers really want predictability. If I'm sitting in a procurement department or I'm a CFO structuring a budget, I want to know how big is the check that I'm signing. And inherently, a pricing model that has variability is a little bit less predictable. That often shows up as an objection or something that is you have to mitigate and design a strategy around. Second, what you said is it's potentially useful if you can align my product's value to the pricing. Well, that's also the most important question. Are you actually aligning and selecting the right value metric to match this behavior that you want to incentivize in your customers? If you get it wrong, you're going to incentivize the wrong thing. And unfortunately, you might not be seeing the kind of long term retention benefits that you want to see. But I think what's interesting is that if you can solve and answer those two questions really, really well, the benefits are massive, which is you're reducing the friction that it takes for your customers to get up and running and start to get more and more value of the solution and see your revenue grow as well.
Because one of the trends that I've noticed as you talk about usage-based pricing, especially on products that have multiple tiers, is that they used to only allow certain users at an advanced level. They would say, hey, you might still be a paid user. However, if you want to use certain feature, you need to pay more, which had certain logic to it. However, now we're seeing more success in companies that say, no, you still can use all the features on, let's say, on the first paid tier. However, there's a limit to the usage. So we still can give you value and show you our full potential before you decide to commit.
And that I think is a lesson that we're learning around as an industry, which is really how can we put our best foot forward to show our customers the sort of full space of possibilities that you can achieve with their solution without injecting too much friction. Here's an idea that was really inspirational to me. At the end of the day, pricing is just friction. And the question is, how much friction do you want to project onto your users? Clearly, too much friction will be, it's not worth my time to even think through this. I'm not even going to try it out. Too little friction, you're leaving money on the table. So, one thing that's, I think, really showing up for us as an industry is let's try to put our best foot forward. Let's maybe offer access in a limited way to the best capabilities of the product. Or heck, we've even seen some teams adopt a tactic called reverse trials, where every new user starts trialing the paid or premium version of the product. They get some exposure to that. They see what an amazing solution this could be before we start to kind of drive them to a conversion funnel.
Also, pricing is risky to test or riskier to test than other features, right? Because you can change the copy or the color of a button or certain experiences, and you can have multiple variations. But with pricing, you kind of have limited shots. So, how do you go about iterating your own pricing hypothesis?
First, it's really important to recognize why is it risky. And it's because at the end of the day, this is one of the clearest surface areas of trust with your customers. If you get it wrong, or if you are like indiscriminately raising and changing prices all the time, you risk really losing the trust of your customers and therefore having a churn problem in your hands. So, some of the best practices around how to iterate is first and foremost, uh, make sure that you're being thoughtful about what risks are you taking. Notably, one of the best practices here is to try out your new pricing ideas with new users. Don't try them out with your existing customers that have a long-standing relationship with you, because you're going to have to take on a lot more change management or communications work in order to get that change through, when you might as well get some new learnings or new signals with some fresh customers coming through your door. I think second, think about how to do it early and often, at least along the key ideas or important questions that you're pondering. I think when folks think about pricing experimentation, the idea that naturally comes up is the one you were talking about, which is sort of this like scaled A/B testing. We're going from the purple button to the green button to the red button, that sort of thing. And because we were just talking about how this is so impactful to trust, it's not the best practice to do that. However, the best practice is not also to never do it, to wait 5 years before, like, we've completely innovated on the product. The solution that we had 5 years ago to the solution that we have right now looks entirely different. But hey, we haven't touched pricing in a while, so now the activation energy and the effort to try to get a new change in is going to be really high. So I encourage folks, be iterative, think about your scope, think about your risk, but do it, and overcome some of that inertia.
Let's talk about some of the design best practices, how to actually display the value of your product compared to the pricing. What are some of those elements that you know that can work kind of across the board?
This is one of my favorite topics because there's so much in the field of psychology that I think naturally overlaps with pricing, and I think it's really important for product teams to think about the user experience of pricing. A couple of examples here. The first is this idea of having a good, better, best pricing strategy and presentation of pricing. That often looks like, you go to a pricing website and you have three tiers to look at. Maybe you have a bronze tier, a silver tier, and a gold tier. The idea around this is to show that there's sort of different value packages for your customers, and try to steer the average visitor to this good package, this middle package that maybe strikes the right balance of feature capabilities and value capture, revenue growth potential. Second is being clear about talking about the value of your product in your pricing page. So many teams design their pricing pages just with the lens of conversion optimization. How can I get more people through to the checkout experience to buy? It's also just such an opportunity to educate the audience around what is your product, what is the value that your product provides, and what's the best way to access that value. Like, I think there's so much education potential to be weaved into this idea of pricing. And then my personal favorite, this is coming from a lot of the customers we support that have more of a usage-based pricing model. When you design a usage-based pricing strategy, there's some amount of usage that comes included, and when you go over, you're going to be charged some overage fee where you're going to have to pay extra. And then at some point at the end of the month, you're going to have to pay that overage bill. If you change the word overage to more positive sounding, say on demand pricing, you're going to immediately remove that objection of like, oh, this, I don't know, nobody likes to pay for overages. Whereas something like on demand pricing maybe sounds a little bit more exciting.
Love that. I think that positive framing, especially around pricing, can make a difference. Even on the lower tiers, like calling something silver doesn't mean bad, right? Or I think that there are also some technical things that we are all used to, such as security of the page or certain testimonials to provide that trust that you were referring to. So we can we can show a value that is bigger than the price ultimately.
And I think
I
that's
think
so it's really important to both be thoughtful about this user experience and lean on these best practices, and also realize that uh, tricks only get you thus far. So if your pricing strategy maybe is not providing enough differentiated value, or you're not maybe making a clear case for why you should pick one tier over the other, sometimes you just have to go back to the and fix those root cause issues. And no amount of designing over these edges might solve the underlying problems.
yeah, that's a great point. Like there's a certain local maximum with design best practices, and at what point what are some of the kind of scientific best practices to actually structure the right pricing strategy that can optimize for revenue growth while maintaining that trust with your customer?
So much of this is about value perception. Um, I think this has been shared in some great books like Predictably Irrational, but humans are not always the most rational when it comes to pricing, and a lot of decisions are often based on feel or say a vibe check. So one thing that I here's the thing, there's a lot of like win-loss analysis you can do over existing customers. You can run scaled willingness to pay surveys, and all of those practices really have a lot of scientific rigor and methodology to them, and I think they're absolutely practices to follow. And the amount of value that you get out of talking to n equals 1, n equals 2 customers about, hey, why did you just buy this? When we presented pricing to you, like, what did you actually learn or think? How did this make you feel? I just want to invite everybody. I want to challenge everybody. Just have a couple of those conversations, and I feel like you're going to get 70-80% of the way there of what like a 12-month consulting engagement around your pricing strategy might get you to.
I want to push a button here, the discount button, especially when you're thinking about multi-product. Let's say subscription business that has multiple products, so they decide to offer a bundle that sounds really appealing to the customer because there's a very high discount. So how do you go about bundling while maintaining a certain price integrity and not diminish the value perception?
Well, let's first explore what are some of the benefits. Some of the benefits of this bundle is like you can really provide this a la carte experience and feel of I'm going off of this suite of offerings. I'm going to create a custom bundle that makes the most sense for me as a customer. And I'm going to pick and choose the elements of value that are most useful to me. So there's like a flexibility benefit. I think, however, teams sometimes make the mistake of presenting bundling options purely from a discount perspective. And let's think about what you're doing. You're talking about like, okay, the total value of this is here, but I'm actually going to reduce that. I'm going to tell you we're going to charge you less. Um, I think that has some of the effect of anchoring folks on a particular um, discount throughout the relationship. Like if I've gotten a 20% discount when I first became a customer, I'm kind of going to expect a similar size discount when I renew as a customer. So there you've already somewhat shifted the conversation towards anchoring your customers to a certain discount point. And second, I think you've kind of lost by even getting to the point where you're talking about discount, you somewhat seeded the ground in terms of is our solution a differentiated offering that is non-commoditized, and therefore we are a premium product that you should think about investing in because of all this great value that this provides for your customers. So often if you're thinking about how to present discounts, it's kind of worth asking how come you let the conversation get to discounts and what can you do earlier to pre-frame.
Yeah, and I had that experience, especially with mobile games. The whole industry was so used to launching that type of discount, like 99% today only, to a point that I start thinking, well, I'm being ripped off. So I'm going to wait for the next 99% discount, and that the trust level goes down and kind of gets commoditized. And then it's why a lot of the products ended up going down because of the wrong pricing strategy.
That's so important. And Carlos, what I just said about humans can sometimes be irrational about pricing. People are really smart though. And whenever you're like presenting a 99% discount or you're all of a sudden, going past the balance point and people are like, wait, why is your solution so cheap? Maybe your product is not that great. So I think it's also important to think critically as to almost like what is that experience of receiving this pricing information as a customer going to be?
Well, we need to talk about artificial intelligence, right? Otherwise, this wouldn't be a good interview. How are you seeing artificial intelligence impact companies that create their own product strategies?
Oh my gosh, that is, I think, a theme that we are seeing left and right and is actually driving a lot of business momentum for Orb because it's such an important question across so many companies, which is, we're still trying to figure out what is our AI product strategy, but what is our AI pricing strategy? How should we evolve monetization? First, let me like share a couple of things that make this hard. Number one, deploying, training, fine-tuning AI models at scale, it's actually expensive. And it's a capability that currently has a pretty direct impact to the top line and bottom line of a company. So when companies are thinking about how should we price AI, they have to somewhat content with the cost structures that those bring. Second, things are changing so quickly in the industry. In fact, this morning, OpenAI had their very exciting announcement. And as part of the news of GPT 4.0, they are increasing the capabilities like tenfold and reducing the price by half. So, can you imagine all these finance teams that are trying to structure their revenue and cost plans around like certain costs of AI, and one day to the next capabilities can 10x improve and price can half x drop. um, the times and sands are changing really really quickly. So here's a couple of themes that we're seeing across our customer base. First, um, a lot of companies are tracking AI costs, but really are still in the phase where we're optimizing for adoption of features and capabilities. So, for example, you see products like Notion release their AI add ons as a fixed price $20 add on. Obviously, they're going to have some customers that are margin positive, obviously, some customers that are margin negative. But what I think that product is trying to do right now is just optimize as much adoption of that feature to then realize what is the impact to the customer lifetime value. So first is like figure out what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for short-term revenue, or are you optimizing towards like learnings and adoption? And second, I think is still to keep it simple. Although we're seeing a lot of examples of an OpenAI like credits-based pricing model for B2B AI infrastructure software, I don't know that we're going to be paying like our Netflix usage off of like prepaid credits anytime soon. So I think keeping it simple and keeping it grounded to a smooth purchasing experience, that's going to be evergreen advice.
Yeah, I think that's tricky, right? Because as a business, you don't want to disincentivize the usage. You want your customers to get as much usage out of it and not even think about the friction of like, oh my god, if I go beyond a certain threshold, I have to pay. So it's really interesting to see how AI features are going to impact the overall pricing of a product. The Notion one is a really good example, and we're yet to see. Like for the most part, like at least the products that I use, like Superhuman as my email client or Slack, they just tend to add that as a free for now feature, but we'll see where they end up.
So, Carlos, that's exactly why I think, look, if innovation is so exploding and changing all the time, if costs are rapidly dropping, the thing to optimize for this as a product industry right now is learnings. How can we, as quickly as possible, really understand the impact of AI into our product strategies? And let's not let pricing get in the way of that.
I love that. I think productizing pricing is smart and also demystifying the fact that it is possible to experiment with it as long as you do it in a thoughtful way and have an open dialogue with the customer, especially if you are going to do this with the next set of customers so you don't risk your reputation with the ones who already agreed to something. Now, let's talk about the cases where, at some point you decide to increase prices. Very common, very standard practice across the industry. Um, what are some of the best practices that you've seen for companies to communicate a price increase to make sure that obviously, even though nobody will like that, it is perceived in a way that doesn't impact revenue so much? Because the example you just gave with ChatGPT with OpenAI is fascinating. I've never seen that before in my life. It's usually the other way around. It's like, hey, we're going to reduce features and increase prices, but you should be happy.
Uh, I think when it comes to communicating news such as a big pricing change, um, being clear, proactive, and direct is so important. So, in terms of being clear, like just explaining, here's what's changing in a way that's really understandable is often a stumble point. Second, if you're trying to do like the midnight before the big price hike, you're just trying to drop some news on your customer base and do like a Friday news drop type of thing, you're going to get a lot of like immediate negative reactions. So thinking about a phased rollout of your communication strategy is as important as thinking about a phased rollout of your pricing strategy. And that piece is super important too. I mean, I think Orb is pioneering that practice of rolling out pricing models in a sustainable way directly in our product. We have capabilities such as versions and migrations that enable our customers to actually control when the pricing change becomes effective for cohorts of customers. And third, this one might be a little bit of a spicy take. Let's speak to our audience clearly with an understanding of, look, I know it's unideal that pricing is changing, but here's why, with direct, clear reasons. I think it's often too common to try to, maybe try to slip some bad news under the rug, or try to say like, hey, here's some disingenuous reasons why this actual price change is good for you, when it might not be the case. And we're savvy software buyers now as an industry, so it's important that we got to be upfront and direct about it.
And Alvaro, my last question is about next steps. What is the next step for you as you continue building the future of pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at Orb, we're very passionate about supporting companies of all sizes with achieving their best pricing goals. I mean, I've had experiences where the billing system was the thing getting in the way from product teams shipping the best possible pricing experiences for their customer base, and we're obviously on a mission to prevent it. But I would also, one thing we're very passionate about is helping companies think through their pricing questions. So this is founding teams just getting started around how should I price, to like scaled companies trying to roll out more product strategies. So I would encourage folks to reach out to me if you ever want to jam or geek out on pricing.
It was great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.